Good morning and welcome. What a pleasure it is to have you come. I'm honored that the year that we had, you'd find time to come and spend some time at 360, and we're going to have a great day. Obviously, we're going to talk corn, as you can well see. We'll harvest corn, we'll do a little tillage, we'll do some planting of corn, so we'll do all the things. But let's get started. So we could spend some time today talking about the spring of 19, and no matter what story we told, somebody in the crowd could one-up us. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. We're going to talk about it for about a minute. You and I take a spring like this, and we learn from it. So all day you're going to hear me challenging you, and we're going to talk about my system. And so how my system is running, you know, we'll utilize it, and we'll tell you about the mistakes we made, the changes I want to make after I come out of a system like this, because this is what our spring looked like here. And we had some real challenges, and you had some real challenges. But you take those opportunities, you say, how do you take your farming system? And you grab a hold of the control knob, and you make some changes, not radical, but you make some changes on what it'll be. We can see what the year rainfall looks like. So this is the last 5 years, and it wouldn't take long if we look at the blue line, that's last year, and you guys all and gals know what kind of crops we raised across the United States, what, 176 point something. And you can see the black line here, but look, even 2015, look at our May. And then we get out here in July here in our area, and it just started to stop. And so we went through 4 weeks of extremely dry. And so as we look at rainfall, it's a huge decider in how your and I year is going to go. And we're going to talk a lot today about how do we drive yields. What are things that you and I, the Lord drives this, and we live with that, but what do you and I do? So this farm that we're sitting on, we farmed it for years, Dad and I, and then we had an opportunity about 5, 6 years ago to buy it. For years, you can see the highway right here, for years we had a low area due to the highway in this borrow pit. So this lake over here is 24 inches higher than my tile. So it never drained. And so this area in here, this is 2007 picture of Google Maps. We'd have 10, 16, 12 acres every year of waste ground there. And I told our team once we bought it, I said, hey, there's an answer to that. All we got to do is start putting some tile in this farm, and we can change the way this farm looks, and you can see the tiling map. And so we got a pretty good sized tile just right here behind us that goes all the way over to those trees, an 18-inch. And it makes quite a difference. So it's a pattern tiled farm that we're going to be working on here today. And you take 2019, and you can see this exact area where we always had 12 to 16 acres of wasteland now is raising crop. And you can see where that big tile comes, and you can see where it's running down through. You look back through the neighbors, you can see we got some real water issues that are back in there. But at the same time, we talk about decisions. How many decisions do you and I make in a given spring? I would challenge you and say in the spring of 20 coming up, you will make over 2,000 decisions, right or wrong. And this year, it challenged us, didn't it? I'd talk to farmers, they say, Greg, I'm just wore out. I don't know which way to go anymore. I thought we were going to do this today, and then it changed. And so I just put up all the different things that you and I have to decide that are going on in any given moment. I would say this. There's some things that you just know in your gut that are right. Do you know in your operation what matters? And you go with it. And sometimes you can't go to the home shop and do it by committee. You understand what I mean? I love my team, and we make a lot of decisions together. But there's some days, if you're in charge of that operation, let's say you're in charge of spraying, and you need to get some chemical down before they hit it and plant corn, you might just have to say, today we're spraying, and it's the right call, and you need to do it. I'll show you what we did. There's something that matters. I know that early bean planting pays for Greg and his family. I've checked it now for what? We're in our 4th year, where we go in and we plant beans as soon as the ground's fit. So I know that. I wore out my pickup in a gator trailer with a gator. I would check as many as 12 to 17 fields a day, looking, saying, will it go, will it go? And so I'm at a field at 4 o'clock, the Hellman farm, and I say, you know what? This thing will go today. And it's April 9th. And we're not quite ready But I know that early beans pay. And so we're not quite ready because I had bought a new Deere field cultivator because of conventional beans, and that floating hitch cultivator wasn't in yet, and it wasn't even put together. And so my guy said on April 9th, we're kind of waiting on it to come in. And I said, we're not waiting for the field cultivator for these non-GMO beans. We're going to go in and we're going to work it today. And so we worked at the vertical tillage harrow, which is not what I would normally do going into conventional beans, because mare's tails and water hemp, this guy just makes them mad. He doesn't kill them. But what is Greg saying? April 9th, we can't pass it because the forecast said rain later tonight. So we heralded it down at 4 o'clock. I got there right around 5, and I started putting this in. We're putting the beans in here, and I'm putting them in saying, I know there's 12 to 15 bushel if we do it today. If it rains one more time, we're just getting later. I'll take the bushels up front, knowing that I will have to pay for the water hemp to be chopped out due to the fact that we didn't take a field cultivator and do some pretty good sized tillage to knock weeds out. But today you look at this field and I'm excited. Will it make 100 bushel? Probably not. Will it touch 90? Could. I don't know what the report's going to say in the 12th, but I can do something with 90 bushel beans. I kind of get excited about them. So those are things that I just say you have a gut. So when you get into spring of 19, you got to know what to do. If you just sit still, it passes you by. I don't know how many of you I've talked to, and they said, one guy said last night in the crowd what he would change. He said, I started planting corn on the 24th, and I don't know why I didn't plant all night. Because he said, that field looks awesome. He said, you ought to see my June 8th corn in comparison to it. He said, if I'd have just known, I'd have worked longer hours, but you don't know. So the point being, if you're in your instinct said it's time to go, it's time to go. At the same time, you can't push corn. You can push beans. We were pretty patient on the corn planters, but our bean planters, we took them and we made them run because we knew what the value would be. How about corn? Well, obviously, ear count always wins. But if you told me you got nervous and on May 16th you said, I'm going to go no matter what, it's time to put my first field in because it's the middle of May, and you socked it in and it wasn't right, you're probably not going to have this type of a looking crop. So there's a cost. And that's what we're talking about today. How do we weigh the cost? How do you make the right decisions? We know what drives yield. We talk about it all the time. Rows around, that girth, early, length. And then this one, pay a lot of attention here. The more I learn about corn, the more excited I get about the end of the race. The end of the race, because this is all about starter, getting corn out at the right time, understanding how its early growth is. We're talking about corn this tall. That's when it sets rows around. You got happy corn or you got a problem cornfield. That's going to show up in a hurry. This 12 guy just doesn't cut it. He's just not going to make it. I like the 16 and the 18s. And then length, 360 kind of just sits right here in this heart of this, and we say nitrogen should not be your limiting factor. We know that you can take a Deere sprayer or a Hagie or a Miller or a Case, and you can go in and correct if you guessed wrong. If nature's been giving you lots of water and your nitrogen's leaving the field because nitrates go with water, you need to come back in and put more on to create this kind of a scenario. That's something you ought to be thinking about. And then at the end of the day, when we talk about kernel depth and the weights that's there, I get pretty excited thinking about what we can add. You realize in the standard of the United States is 90,000 kernels fill a metal bushel basket. Think about it, 90,000 fit in there. If you and I can swell those guys up a little bit bigger, put a little more starch in them, and only 85,000 can fit in the bushel basket, that's 28 bushel. If you told me it's 75 kernels, 75,000, that's 56 bushel more corn. Same population, same ear count, all we did was beef them up. So we'll talk about it today. How are we going to make these guys versus this guy? Because we own this, so does the nature, the environment. But you and I are responsible for some of this. And we'll talk about what we're doing in our operation and say, can we trick corn into heavy kernels because of the fact that we're managing it correctly. We're doing all the little steps. You hear me say that? What have I said that for 30 years? Yield is in the details. You need to do all the little steps. And so we'll kind of dig in and we'll see what it looks like. So we talk about all the things in our operation and what matters. This is what we found. My team, and I apologize, there's 2 young men that are not on there, weren't there for this picture, and I couldn't find a picture of all of us. So Phil and Cam, you're part of the team. But what are we doing? We're analyzing. Were they stressed this year? Oh, yeah. One Sunday afternoon on June 3rd or 2nd, I forget which day was a Sunday, I texted them after church and I said, we're getting up at 1, meet at the shop at 1 o'clock this morning, we're going to start. They had rain coming in for Tuesday of 3 inches. We had a lot of corn to put in, a lot of seed corn. And so we have lots of different planters we can run. We got lots of different tillage tools because a research farm, I said, we're running them all. I said, I'm going to need 5 guys on planters. We're going to need 2 guys on tillage, 2 guys on sprayers. So everybody come in at 1 o'clock. We worked like crazy, and it never rained. We finally just wore out. We went home, went to bed. It never rained Tuesday. And then I'm like, oh, we should have just waited till Tuesday morning to plant. The weather wasn't right all year. If you got a better app than Storm on your phone, tell me, because I'm done with it. I mean, I can't. I mow hay at the dairy, and 3 hours later, it's clouding up. I'm like, where did that come from? And so that's just what we had in 19. But these guys went through fire for me. Cindy and I are so proud of our team, I couldn't ask any more. Knowing also, what do you need to own to make your year go better? Do you have your own sprayer? Can you imagine the nightmare that Sun Ag, our local co-op, had on any given day? So they have a schedule of the farms that need to be sprayed, and all of a sudden it rains overnight over on that side of the county, and it didn't over here. And having to do that dance of switching, having our own sprayer changed our lives this year. We were able to go and switch on the move, whether chemical need to be sprayed or whether nitrogen, whether we needed the Y-drop or fungicide. This here, I still say, our sprayer is probably one of the most valuable pieces of equipment we got on our whole operation. Then understanding how to make efficiency. I'm a lot luckier than I'm smart. We introduced Sprint last year. We got a bunch of these all over the county. This alone made our lives radically different. We were in, I forget exactly which day, it was a Saturday, we were planting seed. And Aaron and I are checking. Aaron called me and said, hey, the Scully farm will go by 11 o'clock. And it's been really wet. We deal with Monsanto Bear there, so we called our fieldman, and he wasn't available. It was a Saturday, and I don't know if he was at a wedding or something, and couldn't find a fieldman. We called our other Monsanto fieldman. He said, hey, I'll come. We went in there. We started at 11 o'clock. We planted 250 acres of seed before it rained that evening. This Sprint put on 8,300 gallons of nitrogen. That planter never stopped once. Efficiency. When it's finally right, how many acres can you get done? Those are things that we talk about. The start out of the gate is where it all is. I look at this row right here, and I can tell you this is going to be high-yield corn. Look at the evenness of the emergence. Look at your spacing. We've made a living on it for years, didn't we? How do you make planters dance? But this tells the story. And I'm a huge fan of getting them out right. So I don't sell starter, but I'll promote starter because I think it's a tool in your toolbox that takes you one great step ahead in really tough springs. And in my opinion, starter should have been put on June 10th. You should have if it had rained all May at your house, you should have been putting a starter system on your planter so when you started in June, you were going to advance corn by what, 5-6 days ahead. So in other words, what I'm saying, if you planted June 8th with starter, it's really like planting May 28th. Get it? Same way with soybeans. We'll show you today in soybeans. So next year, my soybean planter, I'm going to challenge my team to have starter in my soybean planter. I'm going to show you some things down the bean plot to get your motor running. We planted beans there March 28th, and oh boy, do they look good. Should have planted the whole stinking farm that night. It was another one of those deals where I whirled in at 5 o'clock, and I call Aaron, and I say, would you mind getting home late for supper? I think I could put 2 rounds of March 28th beans in. He said, we don't have the groundwork. I said, I know it, shuck that. We're just no-till them in to the ripped ground. No spray or anything on them. Bring the seed planter. So he brought the little male corn planter. That's a 6 row in the center. You know, it's one of those that fold out and put male corn in. And so he made 3-4 rounds in there for our March 28th beans. And then it snowed that night, and it froze the ground twice, snowed twice on them, and everybody laughed and snorted in the neighborhood. They said, "Did you plant in there the other night?" "Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did. Wish we'd have planted the whole 40 acres. Oh, you're crazy." They came up. You wait till you see them. You get your motor running. So we didn't come back in till later on. And then on April 23rd, I said, let's put some starter on beans, just for grins. I said, Tim, put some starter on that plot. They put the starter on. Guess what? The April 23rd beans, 25 days later now, are passing the March 28th on maturity, weight, and pod count. So think about it. April 9th, Greg starts planting beans. I wouldn't use starter April 9th. I wouldn't do it. I'd plant beans until it rained. If it rained me out for 10 days, then I would kick the starter on the May 1st beans and say, could we make them pretend with fast growth to be back here like mid-April? So that's things you got to think about. Starter on corn, though, I get excited when you see this is the exact same hybrid, 1 row apart, and you see the difference. All we're saying is this plant had a sniff of starter. This one did not. And you could say in the crowd, wow, Greg, it'll eventually get there. And it will. But I'm a high risk taker. I'll still take my chances in maturity faster, quicker. I get excited seeing we're that far along. And as the plot went through, I'll miss my guess if there's not some dramatic yield difference. But I'll always take maturity quicker. I'll agree with you. I don't know the day that this pollinates what the temperature is. I don't know how bad the Japanese beetle are the day the silks come out on this later corn. I like my chances on it. So you look at starter. And for years we've used starter on our planters. And you can see the Keaton seed firmer in here. And yes, we had a splitter in them. We'd say starter on the seed. Boy, you got to be careful. But I like starter fertilizer. I don't look at it as an added cost. I look at it as something that I have management in my toolbox that gives me all kinds of options on getting the right hybrids to the right spot. I plant 115-day corn here. With starter, it actually acts like about 112 to 111-day corn. And so it gives me all kinds of opportunity. Years ago, we worked with starter trials of Ken Ferry and Farm Journal. We used to be Farm Journal's test farm. And we just spent days and days in the field with planters. And we would try every starter attachment known to man at that time. And there was one that I was using on my operation. It was a fertilizer shoe called a Niemeyer. And it was a royal pain in the behind. I mean, it didn't fit in right. It didn't always work, you know, quite like you like. But the results of it were earth-shaking. It always won. Yes, it was a pain to put in the planter. It didn't mount in right. You always worried about if you set your planter down on a rock driveway or concrete, it would put the shoes up too shallow. But it had a placement of about, let me pull this up here. I always worry about the guys. So I tell you to come sit in the front row. Now you probably can't see the screen, can you? I appreciate you coming up front. So for years, as we would do our starter trials, where does starter pay? And I'm a huge fan of saying it's got to be below, you know, it's got to be below the seed. If you and I are putting starter anywhere up into here, I'm concerned it just becomes fertilizer for your whole soil profile. It's not doing what it wants to do. So this Niemeyer shoe would come through this right wall, and it would come here and drop starter, and we talked about it for years. You would see me at Precision planning to talk about it, and we would say nothing beats the 3/4 by 3/4 placement. And so as the industry tried to struggle with this, saying what do we build, they started to talk about relay. In other words, they said, well, we're going to put starter up here, or we're going to go 2 by 2. So in other words, 2 inches lower, 2 inches, we'll go over here. And then they said, but maybe you ought to put some starter on the seed so you can get some effect out of the gate. Because what are we really talking about? This is your little seed. Here comes your spike out. As it starts to come up through the ground, this little first root out is called your radical. And that guy lives to feed on phosphorus. Now remember, when Greg plants here, phosphorus, I have P1s on this farm of 42 to 43 parts per million. We don't have a deficiency of phosphorus here. But what happens? Until the soil particle gets 65 degrees, my root can grow right by the seed particle, soil particle, and it can't pick it up because it's locked to the soil until it's 65 degrees. And then the soil releases it, and this little guy can start to get it. So if you told me as this plant grows, remember we have a crown in here, always 3/4 of an inch below the ground is where your crown starts. And so you have your little radicle here, and we want this guy to feed on the starter. If you told me you're going to put starter up here, and a lot of them are in the industry, you're waiting for what? The crown roots. Crown roots are coming out way too late to get the kind of response that we want to see. So I've watched this for years. I've done starter, like we say here. We've been doing it on here because I didn't really like what else was out in the market. And I told our team, I think it's time that 360, being a yield company and a nitrogen company, we jump into this game. And I said, guys, I realize Niemeyer shoe is long gone, but I said, let's invent something that's dual purpose. Because when I think about simplicity, when I'm going to put something on your planter, first thing is it can't do any harm. But after that, I get excited thinking about how do we do something really, really simple. And so I'm going to introduce to you the 360 wave. Let me go ahead and advance it here so you can see it. And so we're going to talk about closing and starter all at one time. Because as this runs through the sidewall, guess what it does? It gets kind of fun as you watch it. Let me get to a new sheet of paper. So you see all the closing systems that are out there in the industry, and they're a dime a dozen, and there's some good ones. But we talk about how do we create the perfect environment. So if I'm going to go out here and put out 38,000 seeds, maybe I'm weird in my mind, I expect 38,000 ears. I wrote a check to Brad Souter for this, and Brad's my pioneer dealer, and I'm saying, Brad, I expect everyone to grow, and we're going to have sessions on this. I realize that maybe I'm a touch optimistic. Maybe we'll have to settle for 37,000 ears, but I don't want to back up. So closing is critical. And for years, we do what? We come in and we got spike wheels, we got Case and other companies got curved disc in here, and we're slamming this shut. So what it looks like is you bring the two halves together and you force them together, and you hope that the soil moisture is such that when it starts to dry out, it doesn't open up. What happens if the sun's shining up here, and right here at the surface, this opens up a little bit, and we got a spike coming up here, and we get light down here? What happens to that spike? What's it do? It immediately does what? Photosynthesis, and it uncurls, and it starts to open up, and then it starts to bend over. And it makes two loops, and you look at that, and you say, I either need to call the Pioneer dealer, or I need to call Mark Bear's Son Ag, because I obviously have some chemical damage here. Something is wrong. All you had was a closing system that let enough light in that photosynthesis took place. So I challenged our team, and I said what we really need, and I saw that for years, and this style of a shoe that comes through the sidewall, it would actually envelope. We call it the wave because it creates a wave. It takes this sidewall here, so this is coming through here like this. It creates a wave. So now the seed is totally enveloped for about the first 1 inch. Moist dirt, nothing off the top here, dry. All this dry falls in. That's always a train wreck. I'll show you pictures of it. And so now we're taking and we're cutting the right-hand sidewall, and we take it over the top. So yes, it's going to be a starter attachment, but what it really is a closing system. Because over the years, when Ferry and I worked with these originals back in '92, we had a problem. Ferry would make me take these off that 8-row test planter when we're checking another starter system to it. Why? Because if we left it on, it would always raise 1.1 to 1.5 seeds plants more due to the fact we're creating this wave effect. So we knew the problems with it. It was hard to mount. We fixed that. The problem is the guys in stone, if this shoe was in there and they hit a rock, the planter would jump up and it'd either break something or it would jump up and we'd have shallow seed. And so I challenged Justin and his team and I said, look, let's keep it simple. We could go ahead and put a lot of electronics on this, but they figured out, so all the design is in the sweep of this knife. And so it's got the ability to always self-go in the trench, so when you start turning a corner, because I know not everybody farms every row straight. So you're out here and you're planting and you start to turn to the right. Our shoe is designed, the design that it turns to the right, and we keep that 3/4 inch. So the seed's here, starter's here, seed's here, starter's here. And so we designed it so that we never get starter on the seed. So I'll just show you a little animation of it here. We'll just take a look at it. So it's going to mount that it's always square in the seed. We'll watch it run here. You'll see the blue is the starter. It'll come around. So it's running right through the right-hand side of the wall. You can see it's waving that soil right over the top of the seed. You can see the blue is going to be over deeper than the seed and 3/4 over. And so we're going to look for some really good effects. So if you said, Greg, I don't believe in starter, I'll never use starter, I still get pretty excited about the closing concept here. Now I can go with the OEM closing system. All it's got to do is finish the top 3/4, get it lightly firmed. We have all the moisture we need to fire this off and let it go. So let's look at it. We're out here in this plot this spring. This is a deer planter. It doesn't have wave on it. And you can see what I'm talking about. When you pinch the two sides together, you can see the seam. The seam is always there. I want to stitch it together so there's no seam, and I'll show that to you out in the field. The day we planted, we had maximum moisture. We had worked the ground ahead at the harrows, and it rained, so we waited a couple days. We came in the plant, so up here on the top, we had some dry dirt. Look how much dry dirt, if I show you with my knife digging it, look how much dry dirt fell in right on top of the seed. So now these are cast closing wheels behind here. It hasn't even happened yet. And so you can see as I dig it out, look how much, look at the moisture on each side. Almost too much moisture in the soil, but all that dry dirt went in and fell in with it. So these are things that we're going to talk about today. How do you and I win, no matter what nature does on your North 80?